take your seats and welcome the moderator, Martina Fuchs.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this panel session, which is already the final one at GlobeSec 2023 in this room here. It's a pleasure to welcome you all and to see that so many of you are still here physically in the room, as well as joining us virtually from home or elsewhere. Our panel discussion is now focusing on energizing independence, Europe's path to a sustainable future. My name is Martina Fuchs. I'm a business journalist and also an advisor on China and the Middle East, and I speak 9 languages. Great to have you all here. It's now my great pleasure and honor to introduce our panelists. First of all, Peter Dovhun. He's the Minister of Economy of the Slovak Republic. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Next up, we have His Excellency Davor Filipović, Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of the Republic of Croatia. Then we have Ditte Jørgensen. She's the Director General for Energy at the European Commission. Welcome. Last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Benjamin L. Schmitt. He's a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us. Right, so I would like to ask all of you here in this roundtable a first opening question, and please answer shortly in 60 seconds, if I may. Is Europe on the right path to a sustainable future? Your Excellency, first of all.
I think yes.
Why? That's too short for 60 seconds.
If we follow all the measures and the level of cooperation between the countries of the European Union, but also of the strategic partners, I believe that the answer is yes. However, and I had an opportunity and an honor talking to Madam Commissioner yesterday, and we shared the same view of it's not about the question whether we did a lot and we have a progress, but also to be aware that besides we are in the middle of the calmer waters, the job has not been finished and done. So there's a lot of things to be continued and delivered. Mr.
Filipović.
Thank you, and hello to everyone. It's very hard to answer this question when he stole my answer. He said yes.
So it's good to have consensus here.
Yeah, I think that we are on the right path, and I think that when you look back in the year behind us, what was happening, brutal Russian aggression on Ukraine, everyone was saying that Europe will collapse, that we will not have enough gas, that Europe will freeze. Nothing of that happened. We had a strong, united answer to this Russian aggression on Ukraine. We had enough gas. We introduced a market correction mechanism at the European level, after which prices of gas started falling down. So there was not extreme issues like it was proposed. It was said by a lot of actors in the media and in the political space. So I think that Europe find other ways to the diversification of supply, and we need to go stronger in that direction. And of course, we need to go in the decarbonization direction to rely on clean energy. And I think that we gave a successful answer to this extremely hard situation.
Ms. Jørgensen, would you agree with that?
I will join the consensus. Indeed, fully agree with what the 2 ministers have said. We are very much on the right path. First of all, because we have managed to address the crisis together, we have been united, we have been determined, we have managed to significantly reduce the dependence on Russian fossil fuels, relying on other suppliers, more reliable suppliers. We have accelerated the green transition as part of the crisis response. We have calmed markets. We've given ourselves all of the instruments we needed in the immediate crisis management, lowering the risks. But in doing that, we have also strengthened our path and accelerated our path towards green transition. And I think essentially what it's about is that we need energy security in order to have climate security. We need the green transition in order to also be secure. And we need energy security in order to engage in the green transition. So this immediate response to the crisis and the longer term pathway towards climate neutrality in 2050 are completely aligned. And that's what we're working on together.
Finally, from an academic and also American perspective, Mr. Schmitt.
Thank you. Well, I guess to add some drama, I should say no, but I don't think that. I think we're going to have total consensus here. I think, yes, Europe has weathered the storm, and the reason it's weathered the storm, and look, I was a former European Energy Security Advisor at the State Department, and I worked with all of your countries and, of course, the European Commission on these issues for many years as well. And a lot of the things that we saw happen in 2022, when the height of the crisis, when Russia was weaponizing energy more than any time in their history, and of course they've been doing this for decades against Europe, all of the energy infrastructure that was able to help weather the storm, things like the Baltic pipe from the North Sea through Denmark to Poland, things like the gas interconnector Poland-Lithuania, the Kirk Island LNG terminal, the LNG terminals that were set up very quickly on the Baltic Sea coastline. These were all things that were pushed forward over the years and came online just in time to blunt Russia's energy weapon when all of the massive and deliberate gas cutoffs happened to the Yamal pipeline, to the Nord Stream pipelines, and elsewhere. So bravo to the European Commission and to our member states' colleagues here, ministers. It's really was great to see. There's a lot more to be done.
Absolutely. Now, we do have a consensus here on the stage, but let me ask the audience here in the room as well, a show of hands, just quickly. Who thinks that Europe is on the right track to a sustainable future? Yes, hands up. I think this is a majority as well. Who thinks no? All right, okay, we do have some opposition. Now, we do have time, of course, in the next 50 minutes for questions from the audience here in the room, but also virtually. So please submit your questions. I can see them here on Slido on the app as well. And we want to make this as interactive and dynamic as possible. At the same time, we have a poll going on. The question is, can Europe be independent and sustainable at the same time? At the moment, we have likely 35% and unlikely 35%. So really a neck-to-neck race. We'll find out more towards the end of the panel who is going to be the winner with this question. Now, Ms. Jørgensen, how much progress really towards independence has been made when it comes to energy since the 24th of February last year and the invasion of Ukraine?
We have made very good progress over the last year, thanks to the close cooperation between European Union member states. We've been working very closely together, of course, specifically with countries here, Slovakia and other countries in the region that have been very directly impacted and where many had a significant level of dependency on Russia. And as you have said, a lot of what we have achieved is thanks to investments and planning, forward infrastructure planning, policy frameworks that we've created over the last decade or two. So without knowing, we have been preparing for this. We had a policy of diversification, and that has helped us a lot. We had a policy of common infrastructure planning and investments, and that has helped us a lot as well. So just to look back at what did we want to achieve and what have we achieved, to be more precise on this. We launched the Repower EU plan immediately after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because we could see that Russia had stepped up its weaponization of energy and really putting us at a security risk and at a risk in terms of our economy because of the impact on energy markets of the Russian weaponization of energy. So we decided jointly, the 27 European member states with the European Commission, to reduce our dependence on Russia by 2/3 when it comes to natural gas by the end of 2022, and to phase out that dependence by 2027. And at the time, most analysts, most commentators said, you cannot do that. You cannot reduce from above 40% dependence and that much within less than a year, because your market is adapted to Russian flows. And yet that's what we did. So by the end of 2022, we had reached our targets and more. We had filled our energy storage, our gas storage and more. We had reduced our overall consumption to make best use of the energy we have. We had stabilized markets, as you said, through various mechanisms taken together in consensus among all European ministers meeting in Council.
This means by the end of 2027, zero dependence on Russian energy. Do you think this is possible, Benjamin, because a lot of your work focuses on Russian sanctions and critical infrastructure? Is this possible?
I think it's not just possible, it has to happen. We cannot return to energy business as usual with the Putin regime, period. I know that there are many that probably would think if there was a ceasefire tomorrow in Ukraine, that somehow the sanctions would be lifted and we'd be back and building Nord Stream 3. I don't think so. I think that this is absolutely essential that we learn from the lessons of the past, that the Russian Federation has weaponized energy for years, and it came to a climax when not only was it cutting off energy to EU countries, to democracies across the EU, but also basically hitting the apex of that quite literally with kinetic strikes horrifically against Ukrainian critical infrastructure. So we need to absolutely diversify, continue to build out infrastructure and find alternative sources of energy. And that, of course, includes green energy. But the thing is, right now, our focus has been on hydrocarbon swaps because that's the fastest to keep the energy security levels at their at their rightful place. But at the same time, as quickly as possible, build out renewable energy infrastructure so that not only is Europe energy secure, but independent of dependencies, period. So this is really important.
Let's see how this is working on a country level. Now, Minister Dovhun, we have the, of course, European Environmental Action Program as well, which builds on the European Green Deal. How does that work together with some of the things that Mr. Schmitt and Ms. Jørgensen have mentioned now? You have so many responsibilities and so much pressure now to make it work.
I signed up for the job under pressure, right? And are you asking on the green transition?
Yes.
Or
how is this materializing now?
And I also received the question whether this is the part of the solution for the going forward and the energy security. And the answer, it's not yes and no, it's much more complex. So bear with me 30 seconds more. How I see it is that it's a matter of timing. Is the green transition, which means building the solars and the wind power and the accumulation, the solution within 2 or 3 years time frame? We might argue about that. And it's not the personal opinion. The system we have been using, or actually getting the benefits from, has been built in course of 100 and 140 years. So we need to bear this in mind. Long term, definitely yes. If we really want to contribute to sustainability, to really have the green society, this is the way. If we want to secure the energy, security of supply, it needs to be worked out with a sensitivity and in the right step order. The last part, and we discussed it in the morning, there's another element of the discussion, and it's the affordability of the energy. To really make sure that every measure that we are considering and we're going to apply has a clear and transparent visibility on the impact to the prices and to the tariffs, to the cost of the industry, public sector, and the households.
You mentioned that this green transition needs a lot of time and money as well, Minister Filipović. Given all of that, can actually a transition be independent at all? Because we do still live in a globalized world, more or less.
We live in a globalized world, definitely, and you need to balance all the time. But I will comment on something that Benjamin and Ms. Jørgensen also said when it comes to European independency, when it comes to supply of energy. What we need to do, we need to build on infrastructure, because if each country gives, how can I say, its contribution by building infrastructure, we're building more security for each country, but also security for whole European Union. I'll tell you what we did in Croatia. So we opened up the new LNG terminal with a capacity of 2.9 billion cubic meters. And when that project started, it was a ton of actors and political space coming from left side and right side saying it's a terrible project, that it should not be done. Croatia spends 2.9 billion cubic meters when everything works in full, when industry works full, when households are spending a lot of gas, so we can cover all our needs with our LNG terminal. So can you imagine what would happen, in which situation would Croatia be if Croatian government did not decide to build the LNG terminal? Now what we are doing currently, we are expanding that capacity, we are doubling the capacity in order to be a good neighbor to our countries and in order to provide and supply gas from Croatia to our neighboring countries. Parallelly, we are investing in our pipeline, so those are processes that are happening currently in Croatia, and we want to be able to supply Slovenia and other countries with the gas coming from Croatia, and also Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that's how we are impacting the European independence when it comes to energy, and especially when it comes to gas.
I would now like to open the floor for questions already. I believe there is a first one from Marcus Becker from GE. Right here. That's why I can't see you. Go ahead.
Well, not so much a question, but I think a comment and observation.
Wait for the mic, please. Thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, not so much a question, but I think an observation. And I also, from our perspective, I think, GE is a technology company that's serving the energy industry all the way back to Thomas Edison. So we've been around for some time, and we also have a broad portfolio of technology. So we're not, recommending, because there is no silver bullet technology, a portfolio approach. But time is of essence, right? And we really, I think, simplify the message is we need to be bold and brave and really also go for speed and scale, right? I think we wasted a lot of time to focus on, favorite children and, specific technologies, but the technologies that we need for 2030 are basically there. And so I really applaud the Commission also with the recent electricity market reform proposal, to really, make sure we get the investments that we need. What is missing yet, I think, is the longer-term assets that we need to back up the renewables to really, build the energy system and bring financiers and project developers together for the longer-term flexibility assets that we need on the system. So I think those are, the key points that we see as speed and scale, and then to really make sure that also for the longer term, with probably the next Commission mandate, maybe not look at capacity, but at capability, because I think the grid of the future is not only about putting kilowatt hours on the grid, but putting the right type of kilowatt hours on the grid. So.
Great. Please hand over the mic to this gentleman here. In the meantime, would anybody like to comment on the remarks? Yes, please.
Yes, please. Just very, very briefly, because I think this question of accelerating speed and capacity, how important that is, and linking that into what you said, Minister, a transition takes time. It's not tomorrow that we are suddenly independent and completely sustainable. That's not what it's about. We do need to accelerate it, and essentially because the Green Deal, the energy transition, an energy system that has higher shares of renewables, that is more energy efficient, that has more flexibility mechanisms, that has better storage for the electricity we use, that has more diverse sourcing, that is also a more secure energy system. So again, I think that transition is absolutely necessary for our security. And I think we need to think about security in terms of resilience rather than complete independence. As you said, we live in a global world. We have reliable partnerships, including with the US, where we saw the supply to Europe of LNG close to tripling over last year as a result of very, very close cooperation. So we need global partnerships as well. We need diversification, as your Crick LNG terminal and investments there have shown. And then we need to be able to manage the transition as quickly as possible, but it does take some time, and we need to make sure we do it in the right way.
That's a very clear roadmap. Yes, Minister.
I just want to confirm by saying, immediately or long term doesn't mean that we're ready, and as the country and the partners would be supporting the transition and the action from today, actually from tomorrow. That's just a remark to think that we're aligned here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Next question, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrej Žarovský. I'm BOD member of nuclear company VUE. My question to Mrs. Jørgensen. One of the maybe intentional consequence of Energiewende and Green Deal is the firm binding between the price of natural gas and electricity. The first hit of energy crisis in autumn 2021 came from 2.5 months no windy weather on northern sea coast. So it caused the first peak of the price of gas around the 160 euros per megawatt hour. It was without any influence of Russia. Still continuing the situation, and until there is institutional binding between price of national gas and natural gas and electric energy, still European energy system cannot be called as safe. My question to you is, are there any plan or measures to mitigate this continuous threat? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. So the beginning of the crisis was actually a combination of a number of aspects on the supply side. Importantly, on the supply side, Russia started reducing supply to the European Union well before the war. There was a very early weaponization of gas supplies, which meant that European storage was not filled when we got into the winter. And the best example of that is the fact that those storage facilities that were owned or operated by Gazprom were at 15% full, that's technically empty, whereas the storage held by others were at higher levels, not high enough, because of that weaponization, that reduction. But the difference, I think, sends a very clear evidence, if you will, of what was already happening. As you're saying, there were other factors on the supply side. The weather plays into our energy supply, and we need to make sure we're prepared for that, which links into the point about flexibility mechanism and electricity storage as necessary. You're right, of course, that one of the aspects we saw in the crisis, one of the challenges we had in the crisis, was the fact that our electricity market works very well, but it also means that at times of high price volatility of one of the components, high prices of one of the electricity generating mechanisms, that brings overall high consumer prices. And we saw that with the very high and very volatile gas prices, the impacted electricity prices for consumers, and that was a problem. It was a problem for households, energy poverty. It was a problem for our competitiveness for small and medium-sized enterprises, but also for large energy-intensive industries. And so we have taken measures to address that. We have created a toolbox to address the high prices. We've taken a number of emergency measures together with the ministers and other member states over the last year. And then we have made the proposal that the gentleman referred to adapt our electricity market design so as to cut that dependence, meaning that the bill consumers actually pay is not as dependent on the short-term price volatility and high gas prices, by moving into by empowering consumers, giving them the possibility for fixed price contracts, creating a better market, a bigger market for longer-term pricing arrangements and support arrangements, contract for difference, and power purchasing agreements.
Some brief comments from you.
Yeah, I want to just say that I think that I certainly agree with everything that the Director General said. Security of supply is absolutely essential, and that's where diversification infrastructure, that's where looking for new sources of energy are really important. But I want to just say that over the years, these discussions that we've had at GlobeSec and elsewhere have often taken what I like to kind of call the Bloomberg terminal approach, like an economics first approach to energy security. And that's really, I think, in a peacetime environment, very essential. But at the same time, there was overlooked characteristics of Russian energy weaponization over the years for menacing the potential for critical infrastructure. And so we have a situation now where in the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea, we're seeing more and more reports in the public sector, in the media of Russian alleged intelligence vessels menacing critical infrastructure, electricity cables, offshore gas pipelines, and things like this. So we absolutely need to take that into consideration and have this merger between energy security, where you have kind of the military security aspect of this talking to the markets aspect of this, and not have this economics-only approach to energy security.
Minister Filipović, what's your reaction?
That couple of words on the electricity market, because we are currently discussing on the European level and with the European Commission about reform of electricity market, where we would try to make the difference between the price of gas, the impact of price of gas on price of electricity, because when you take aside was what Ms. Jørgensen was saying, that last year at one point of the time the storages were practically empty, and there was a big demand, and of course that influenced high prices of gas. But I have to point out that a lot of speculators showed on the gas market, and then they artificially increased the price. And at one point of the time, the price was, I think in August, it was around 350 euros per megawatt hour, which was not normal. And if you talk about economics, if you have enough of some product on the market, then that price cannot be so high.
Yeah.
So there was enough gas on the market, but the price was going extremely high until we had a unanimous answer on European level. Last year, we practically had somewhere around October till December, we had meetings of energy ministers almost every week in Brussels or in Prague or in Luxembourg, and we agreed to introduce market correction mechanism, which means that we've kept the price, I'll put it like that, on 180 euros per megawatt hour, and we will send a message to all the speculators in the market that we will not tolerate their behavior, that we will not tolerate that somebody's getting richer and richer on the back of our citizens on whole European soil. And that was a big success, because after we introduced it, the price of the gas was started falling down, and now we're having situation that the storages are not on the level of they are not empty like last year. They are solidly full, I'll say it like that, and now there will not be so high demand when it comes to filling those storages. So we don't expect any wild prices when it comes to gas in this year.
But as you said, if you have market distortion and market volatility, that's really bad news.
Yeah, just very briefly, because I agree with what the Minister has said, it really is important, the different measures taken to stabilize prices and bring them to a level that reflects the reality of markets. We were not in a shortage situation. Prices should not have been where they were. You mentioned 350. A few days ago, they were down to 24. So that gives you an important important example.
Price stability, obviously very important in this inflationary environment. I will take one question from Slido as well, and then we go to the gentleman there in the back who was thinking that we are not on the right track to a sustainable future here in Europe. We will get your opinion in a moment. The question here on Slido is very important on nuclear energy, of course, as well. Let's not forget about nuclear. What role does it play on the way to energy independence? Yes, please, Minister.
If I can use the opportunity to be at the GLOBSEC session, which is the interactive, not just the one way, and to ask you a question. I see electricity and the direct electrification, or using the electricity to produce the green molecules, as the key part of the energy transition. Do you agree?
Okay, hands up. Who agrees in the room? Minority?
Okay. So the majority doesn't agree that the electricity would play. Okay.
Once again, the question.
Okay, so if it comes to the measures, to the real, to how the energy mix would look like in the future, so instead of burning gas and burning oil, electricity for the direct consumption, heating pumps, driving the cars, or used for producing the green molecules, the hydrogen or other gases, is a cornerstone of a very important part of the transition. So my question was whether you agree that the electricity demand would grow in the years. So let me ask this question.
Yes. Majority.
Okay,
absolutely.
now we got
They're
it.
all on your side.
Goody. I asked the question because this is one of the angles, because we can argue, I like nuclear, I don't like nuclear, I have the bias here or there. However, the fact is that we see through all the projections and the modelings that it will be doubling or tripling when it comes to the demand of the electricity in the next decades. And the demand would be partially based on the behavior and the demand change, but also it would be 24/7 for the industry, for producing the green gases and so on. And nuclear is one of the technologies that is available today, and that's what probably gentlemen referred to, that is able to produce the electricity and generate the electricity 24/7 without the intermittency of the other options. So shortly, the answer is yes, but it's not because of the personal opinion, it's just getting to the context.
Yeah. Maybe one more input here on nuclear energy. Yes.
Well, I think maybe first of all to fully agree with the Minister on electrification as a critical driver of the transition towards more energy security, affordability, and sustainability. So fully agree with you on that, because the use of electricity is typically more efficient than the use of molecules. It's not a preference for electrons over molecules. It really is what is most efficient. How do we make best use of the resources we have? We have done an analysis of how do we arrive at climate neutrality in 2050. That's our common target. And in that analysis, we have looked at what's the European energy mix. So within the European Union, the energy mix is a national decision. We have common targets for renewables, we have common targets for energy efficiency, but beyond that, it's a national decision. And some of the European member states have nuclear as part of that mix. What we see at European level is, in order to become climate neutral in 2050, in order to have an energy system that supports that, we're going to need nuclear electricity in that mix. So then nationally it's you decide how much and if you want it, but at European level together it is part of the energy mix envisaged towards 2050.
Mm-hmm. We now take a question from the audience. The gentleman here, do we have a microphone? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Benjamin Tallis, German Council on Foreign Relations, and happy to play the skunk at the feast. So I think it's important to give credit to the right steps that have been taken, but there's a danger, I think, of being a little bit too self-congratulatory too soon. And I'd say this because we asked, are we on the right path? I think we have to consider at least two paths here. And one is the path of our green transition, the other is the path of our geopolitical transition. We've heard we're in a globalized world, but it's not the same globalized world as for the last 20 years. And managing that transition is going to be key to managing our green transition. The green transition path still runs through China. We are massively dependent upon Chinese technology, materials, minerals for the technologies of our green transition. Our geopolitical path runs around China. How can we bring those together? Thank you.
Would you like to ask someone in specific, or do we have some volunteers here on stage?
I'd like to hear from any of those who'd like to answer, but particularly from the European Commission, also from the Slovak Minister and from Ben Schmitt.
All right. Would you like to start, first of all?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's pretty clear that we have to get to a place where dependency on authoritarian regimes is simply ended. We've seen Russia weaponize energy in gas cutoffs, in strikes against Ukraine, etc. But we also have to look at the concerns about strategic corruption, the way in which Russia has weaponized energy and co-opted and coerced senior officials and former senior officials over the years to bend to its geopolitical will. And this is why the practice of elite capture from the Russian Federation, it's a strategic corruption issue, but it's definitely associated with energy. If we look at the case of Gerhard Schroeder and a number of other officials from Austria and France that have gone to work for Russian state-owned enterprises. So we need to stop the practice right now of former senior officials from Western democracies working for authoritarian regimes. I've called for, in front of US Congress, the Stop Helping America's Malign Enemies Act that would allow us to stop basically set a norm for former senior officials working for authoritarian regimes, state-owned enterprises, or their subsidiaries. And by the US doing this, it will set a norm, and I think the European Union countries should follow suit as well. I've called for this in Canada as well, so that's got to happen.
Any reactions already to the comments from the gentleman? Yes, please.
Maybe briefly, we need to do more to strengthen our economic security, and we're working on a more comprehensive strategy on economic security, including for discussion among heads of state and government later this year. Now, you've pointed to some of the very important aspects of economic security. We have, over the last year and a half, been through the aspect of the direct dependence on Russia that we have reduced, and that's, of course, only one aspect. Because in general, we should avoid the dependence levels, we should diversify, we should be more self-reliant, but we should also work closely with partners. We're not alone, and so we need to engage in the global partnerships. Just briefly, a couple of the things we have done over this year in order to address exactly the concern you're pointing to. Now, first of all, the green transition, both in the energy sector, but also more generally, the changes that are needed in our economy will require different technologies, different supply chains, and critical raw materials. So we have made a net zero industrial plan, and we've made proposals for a net zero industrial act that will aim to strengthen our supply chains, to secure our supply chains, including by investments within the European Union, facilitating European manufacturing, but also working with partners so that we strengthen those supply chains and make them more secure. We've also proposed a critical raw materials act, which has the same logic. We need to make sure that we are not too highly dependent on any one supplier or processor for critical raw materials, and we need these critical raw materials for the transition. And so the critical raw materials aims to strengthen our capacities there. Again, not alone, but in cooperation with close partners, so that we have the right trade flows and partnerships with our global partners.
One element in that question also mentioned China, and of course the country is steaming ahead with solar, wind power, EVs and so on. How can countries like yours, Slovakia and Croatia, compete with such a huge market?
The question is whether we are or have been competing in that area. I think the question is what we can do about it, and it's both on the national level, but together with our partners in the EU. And I've taken a challenge for 5-6 months. You can't change a lot in the office, but in order to focus on the things that you can really do in that time frame is to choose 3 priorities, and one of them, along with the energy transition analysis and the plans and the scenarios that would be available for the new government to take on and make a decision. It's also the strategy of what supply chain, what technologies, what competence, what innovation we would like to bring to the country, but also as the supplements to the partnerships with our neighbors and Europe. And exactly, we see a higher demand, and it's going to grow in the new green technologies, not just the EVs, solar panels, accumulation, the batteries, etc., etc. These needs to be addressed, and again, it's not about are we competing today. The question for me, for my team, is really what we can do about it in the years to come to be less independent on one country. And Mrs. Jørgensen mentioned the raw materials. It's not only the China, it's really, I think, and that's what the Commission and the countries have been doing. I observed that through the TV set, is looking at the different risks, different regions, from the geopolitical ones, from the climate change, etc., etc. So that's another point of the answer.
Mr. Filipović?
I think we can compete on the European level, and Ms. Jørgensen said what we are doing on European level in order to give response to the China and Croatia as well as Slovakia. We can be part of that European solution. We need to think about nearshoring, friendshoring, and bringing a production back to the European soil for critical raw materials and everything else what is needed in order to go in the direction of a green transition. So European solidarity and European unity is key when competing with China in this matter.
We have one question from the audience here. Please wait for the microphone. It's coming to you right now. Thank you.
Hello, Energising from GeForce. We invest in climate technology companies. I have a question for you. One important part of the energy transition and helping solve climate change is not just creating policies and making ideas come together, but also implementing these changes. And there was one moment in the world where the world was in danger. If you remember, the ozone hole was a big issue. Today it's solved. The world came together, and it was not just ideas, it was implementing these ideas into practice. So the EU is one of the biggest supporters of green innovations through grants, a very important part. What is also important and is not happening very much, and my question is on the European Commission level, is how can we faster implement these technologies to bring them into practice? One element which is very underutilized is public tenders and European tenders for technologies which can really bring some innovation. My question is, are there any plans in speeding this up to make sure the transition is going to be faster?
I guess the question is to Ms. Jørgensen.
Yes.
Thank you. It's a very, very important question. We need a faster rollout of new technologies, both to be competitive and to meet our green targets and to achieve climate neutrality. I think, as you're also implying, we are actually in Europe very, very good at innovating. If you look at the number of new patents, in particular in green tech, we are far ahead. But we are currently less good at making it marketable and scaling some of these innovations, and so we need to strengthen our capacity there, and we are working on that. I think the response to that is actually multifaceted. We need to look at strengthening the capital markets union, which is really necessary for the investment and the financing. So that's just one example. We need the skills, we need the raw material, we need the supply chain. So there's really a number of components that we have to make together, which is all about economic security at the end, because it's about the longer term security for Europe and European countries. And then we need to work together. I think you made the point, Minister, that when we are united and when we act together, we are stronger and we are much more able to compete. To give you one recent example, we have started a new mechanism to jointly purchase natural gas. It's in a different sector, but it's in a sector where you've typically have had 27 countries each with their many operators operating. And we're now going together to aggregate our gas demand and to jointly purchase. And then it's a good example, a very operational example of how can we strengthen our presence by doing it together rather than doing it alone.
And you mentioned investment, which is obviously key. Now, is there enough investment in the market to really trigger this paradigm shift? We can, of course, always need more money, but is it enough, a sufficient basis, do you think?
It depends what are you investing in. It's always the question when you're investing. But when it comes to investing in renewable energy, I think there is enough of investment happening right now, but also there is a space to boost it in the future. But currently in Croatia, we are having a big tender for geothermal energy. Yeah. We opened it up. We opened that tender in December last year, and I think it ends this month. We expect a big interest of potential investors, and we have 6 research fields because Croatia has a big geothermal potential, and I think that's a great example of green transition, because all these research fields before they were used by oil and gas industry, and now I'm pretty sure if all those research is successful, we will have a new 600,000 megawatts of new electricity produced in Croatia, which is strengthening our electricity security. We will have around 400 million of new euros of investment. So those are things that have a big potential. So I'm pretty sure they will be successful, and in that way we will contribute to the European green goals and strengthen as well as Croatian electricity supply and security, as well as European security when it comes to electricity and supply.
You would like to add as well?
Yeah, I just would like to add one element. It's not about the only about the amount of the money and the finance available. It's about the structure and the order. And again, I'm just coming back to the infrastructure. And we probably had the chance to read an article in Economist a couple of months ago where there was an illustration of hug the pylon instead of a tree. That's exactly, there is a big appetite to build the new sources of electricity, solar, wind, even the storage is the thing. And the question is the grid ready? And just sharing the example, not to be very theoretical. In my past role at the electricity transmission system operator, we understood that the investment into green technologies is the way going forward. But we lacked the experience, not only maintaining the grid, but also maintaining the system. Our control room has this kind of the question, are we really doing everything not to get a blackout? This is a bad word here. So we reached out and started to exchange the experience with our colleagues in Austria, in Belgium, in Germany, to really get ready. And we understood that, for example, Austria, we're talking about the tens of billions of euros to be invested only to the grid reconstruction and enhancement. So I agree with what you said, just adding the one thing that it's not only about the new generation resources and the storages, but also the infrastructure.
Mr. Schmitt, we hear a lot about LNG, nuclear, solar, wind, and so on. From your opinion as an American living in the US, what's your take? What is the best energy mix for Europe?
I think that the best energy mix for Europe is basically what Europe is pursuing. The REPower EU plan is absolutely spot on to fill in the gaps. Capturing flared gas, for example, is a really interesting idea that needs to happen. I mean, to increase market liquidity for backing storages in the EU. At the same time, I think that we also need to look at outside of the EU what's going on in terms of Europe's external energy policy, and that includes Russia sanctions. And so I think that a number of measures that have been done quickly were, maybe unthinkable in the past. The oil embargo, for example, but that's gone forward. But the oil price cap, for example, that was set at $60 a barrel for back in December. That was far too high at the time, and it's been 6 months. We need to see that come down closer to the marginal cost of production that Russia has for Urals. At the same time, enforcement has to be increased. I think the idea I've heard around here at GlobeSec of having a European equivalent of the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control for sanctions, incredibly important, and using commercial space assets to track and enforce sanctions and fill in the gaps in the AIS-based system for tracking oil vessels in particular and stopping ship-to-ship transfers through satellites in the commercial sector that are now finally available in the radio frequency domain, in the synthetic aperture radar SAR domain. Very important, and at the same time, this is going to help Europe realize its goal of not being able to return to a business as usual status with Putin, because it can't happen. There cannot be a future in which Europe's energy security is put at risk by an authoritarian nation. And that means that also critical minerals dependencies and things like this around the world, and export controls and technology dependence on China, for example, cannot happen either.
Thank you very much for your advice. I'm sure we will take it seriously here in the room. We have time for one more question from the physical room or the virtual room. And while we are waiting for one more hand to raise, I would like to ask His Excellency Minister Dovhun. Now, we've had a lot of international agreements, from the Paris Agreement to the Kunming, Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and so on. Do we need more international agreements, less? What is your point of view?
If the agreements are to get us to the answer to the question if we need to do something, it's my personal opinion, we don't need another summit. I think that talking about Slovakia, talking about our European partners, we're clear about the answer to if. Yeah, we need to. If it comes to the how, when I think it's on the experts to collaborate to really make sure that we keep the security of supply, impact to our environment, and the affordability of the energy and the prices in line with our ambition that the European Union is the region where the industry strives, where the households could actually fulfill their dreams, and where the public sector is providing the services to everybody that lives here.
We have one final question from the gentleman there behind. Yes, the microphone is coming to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan Riley, the Atlantic Council. It's probably to the Director General and to Ben Schmitt principally. But obviously we've done very well. Europe has survived the winter. But the question is how far are we really prepared for next winter? Because yes, we've done a lot of things, but still, a cold winter, higher Chinese demand, and the Russians taking out Turk Stream and perhaps the Ukrainian transit route, and no LNG perhaps. And remember, US LNG is the largest importation to Europe first, then it's Russian LNG. We lose all of that. How is Europe going to cope in the next winter and the winters to follow? That's my
excellent question.
Thank you very much. So we have invested a lot in preparing for next winter and the winter after that, given the fact that we're still in a global energy crisis and there are still significant risks out there. What we have done is to address the risks where we have some degree of control, where we can act to improve the situation. We've put in place common rules for storage. We have filled our gas storage. We have invested in renewables. We have accelerated the deployment of renewables. We have reduced our consumption, and we're investing in energy efficiency, in heat pumps, in all the local measures that you can take to do that. You mentioned geothermal, a really important investment for energy security as well as for affordable energy. We have stabilized markets. So we have, and we're doing joint purchasing so that we can benefit from LNG supplies and gas supplies from different suppliers, diversifying and limiting the risks that are otherwise in the market. So everything that is within our control, we have addressed together as a European Union and with our international partners. As the question rightly points out, there are a number of factors that are outside our control. The Chinese demand is outside our control. The risk for critical infrastructure, we can mitigate the risks, we can do as much as possible working together to limit the risks for critical infrastructure, but there are risks out there. And so, of course, we have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Our planning for winter 23-24 essentially plans for the scenario where there would be no Russian supplies at all, and where it would be a cold winter. That's what we have to be prepared for. And that's what we are doing, and that's why I think we have made a lot of progress. So we're probably as prepared as we can be, but there's a lot of uncertainties out there in this geopolitical context.
It's all about scenarios, and we hardly have time to enjoy this beautiful summer here in Bratislava at GlobeSec 2023. Already need to prepare for winter time. Final word from Mr. Schmitt.
Yeah, I think that critical infrastructure protection is one of the kind of unappreciated energy security areas that really needs to be looked at right now, not only in the Baltic and North Seas, but the Mediterranean as well. I think that following this talk that we're having here, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, will be here. I hope someone will stand up and ask, can we finally get the Mid-Cat pipeline done? Forget about this offshore Bar-Mar proposal they've done. That will take way too long. And then finally, I'm going to just one more time call on my government to pass the Stop Helping America's Blind Enemies, or SHAME Act, and the ability of former senior officials to work for authoritarian regimes. And hopefully European friends and allies will do the same thing. We cannot be reliant on authoritarianism in democracies going forward.
And you, Benjamin, have to go over to the other stage right now to address Monsieur le Président with this question. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the results from our poll up now. Can Europe be independent and sustainable at the same time? Likely 43%. So on this positive note, ladies and gentlemen, I have some announcement to make, which is now that we are wrapping up this final panel here at Maria Theresia stage, soon at 1:45 p.m. sharp, we will welcome French President Emmanuel Macron, and afterwards conclude with the Prime Ministers of Slovakia and Croatia from your countries. Gentlemen, I would also like to remind you now that you can come back here to this room to watch live the live stream of President Macron. And there will be a keynote followed by a Q&A as well, where you can raise your questions. So please feel free to ask either in the room afterwards or on the GlobeSec app as well the questions that you have. Thank you so much for being part of this stimulating discussion, thought-provoking as well. Let's get some action done, and I hope to see you again at GlobeSec 2024. Thank you so much, everyone.